Well, I'm recording.
I'm recording. Camera
You're
there.
recording. Wow.
Microphone.
Microphone. So sorry for anyone who yeah, we're just experimenting a bit right now. So we're tinkering around. So videos and podcast episodes that come out
You're gonna
around
leave
this
this in.
time. Yeah, I'll leave this in. I think this is the age where you can be what's the word? Transparent, or there's a to some amateurism, there's an endearing quality. You know what I mean? Like when something's honest. You know, like it's nice to leave the blemishes in sometimes. It makes it feel more real.
Sometimes it's just amateur.
No, well, sometimes it is, but you know, it's more human. It's more relatable. Like, I feel like when someone, whether it's, it doesn't have to be content, could be anything. But when like for example, when someone's doing like a big important speech,
Right.
right, and then they muck something up or they stall, and they acknowledge the fact that they've mucked up or stalled,
Yeah.
and the audience goes and they can make it funny.
Yeah.
All right, I'm trying to think of an example, but like, oh, that shouldn't be happening. Or there's a famous example of Steve Jobs, I think, where he does it during one of those famous like product launch things, and something's not working, and he's like, oh, you'd think at Apple we'd be able to make techno, you know. I don't think it made it would makes it. I think it elevates it.
I think
You know what I
acknowledging
mean?
it helps.
Acknowledging it is really good. I don't
Yeah.
like who's really sitting there pissed off.
No one. Everyone knows
Anyway,
people make
we
mistakes.
are a work in progress.
We haven't made a mistake
and
yet,
my
though.
technical the technical insight the technical know-how to set up the podcast stuff
Well,
professionally.
We've got two cameras now,
We have two cameras,
and we've got two.
and this is a first. So
I think it's good.
I'm you know, it's a very anyone who would check out this little journey would have just been witnessing a very slow but graceful evolution, but very slow. Very slow, but it's coming along. As I said to you when you sat down, like there is a vision.
There's a
There's a
vision.
vision here, and this is where we were. This is where we are now. This is what we were talking about before, right? But this is where we're going, and where we're going.
Can
where
you
we're
lay
going.
out either of them, please?
I'm just saying, in terms of quality, has always been there, but
Yeah.
production quality, there's a vision, and production quality takes it's a gradual process.
It is.
For people like more so me. But you know, any of the when I look back at an old Theo Von episode or Tim Dillon, like the setup used to be very basic, and I think Theo Von started in his kitchen,
Yeah.
and then no business calls now. Oh, can you believe that? Anyway, sorry.
Can believe it.
Oh, it's just a stupid call. So anyway, I don't know. Why don't we talk about you? How are you? Welcome back.
Good. It's been a
Welcome
while.
back. Yeah, the episodes, it's been a barren desert of episodes, but
I would like to call out the last episode when you, well, not call out, just clear up something that was said on the last episode with Mitch.
oh,
You
with
said we
Mitch.
had a falling out.
Yeah. I thought that sort of drama would be good for the views.
Just to clarify, we didn't have a falling out.
I thought this would be a good clear the air. This would be a good clear the air. You
What
talking
are we
about
clearing?
the falling out. Yeah,
Well,
Paul's upset with you. 'cause
I
you
know,
pulled out of
yeah.
the
Sorry, Paul.
episode. He's like, he said,
I feel
I'm
bad.
not making this up. He said, I hate Luke. He
Jeez.
said, I don't know him that well, but I hate him. And he goes,
Fair.
no, he didn't. He didn't. But I haven't seen that episode back yet. I still haven't. We ended up talking about, it was very civil. And
As opposed to the
well, it
last
wasn't. I
episode.
thought, it wasn't like a tearing apart workplaces or anything.
Oh, right,
It was actually
okay.
a really nice convo.
Yeah. That's
You'd like the guy Malad who was on with us. I thought it was going to be 7 blokes. Ended up being me, Paul, and this lovely Malad. But Malad's like, he's a smart guy. Like he
Yeah.
was really on the. It's funny. I think you take for granted in general people who are dialed in the way you are. Like you just never know how many people are out there that notice things you notice or see things the way you do. That's why books, podcast stuff is very interesting. This style of book and
Yeah.
podcast as well. Even from when I first started doing this, and like people like you and Dom listened and stuff, and like Martino, and then it's like, oh, Luke's looking at this stuff as well. Like Dom notices this stuff as well. Like, oh, that's interesting. Like you don't know, and you meet people who see things like the same way. It's very interesting. And it's very like reassuring because you're like you feel a bit less crazy. So yeah, it's always nice meeting him, my lad. How you been, Luke?
I've been well.
Apart from our feud,
Yeah,
this
well,
big
I
feud
think
we've had.
it's
This
best
big. It's best we just
you just leave it.
get
there.
the sweep out and I'll
Make sure you
just chuck
don't
that under
talk
the
about
rug.
it again. That's probably the best strategy.
We're moving
Just
on.
leave it.
We're drawing
Move
a
on.
line. We
Draw a line in the sand.
shake hands.
Don't
Yeah.
don't
Thanks, mate. Don't hold grudges.
no,
Just
I mean,
let it be water under the bridge.
I'll always have a sort of bit of animosity there, but what have I been doing?
Mate, we're getting older.
We're getting older, yeah. 31.
31. I'm not far
Yeah.
behind you. I'm almost 31. A couple of months.
Yep.
And I thought we talked before. That'd be interesting to get into a bit. How things are kind of like. Things are like. It's funny noticing the change. Like nothing will ever. I wouldn't say prepare you because I wouldn't. That's a bit dramatic. But you're never going to know exactly what an experience is like before you get there, no matter how much other people talk about it.
Yeah.
I think that's what I mean. So I found this chapter very interesting.
Yeah, what's it like from your perspective?
Well, especially it's interesting as a single guy because it's surreal going to weddings, and it's like, oh my God, like getting married seems like such a formal life big stage.
It's a
I'm
big
like,
event.
oh my gosh, my friend is getting married. And it's like, it's kind of surreal, especially the first close friend wedding, which would have been McNamara's, which was like January last year. That was like, yeah, that was weird. Because I've been to weddings for cousins who are
Yeah.
younger than me,
Yeah.
you know, but it didn't hit. Well, they're still like relatively close, but it didn't hit like a guy I went to school with and people in our friendship group we went to school with. Yeah, it just didn't hit. It's like, wow, like this is a life stage. Like
It's a
because
huge-
being married is like, you're not a kid. You know what I mean? Like you're not like in that early pre-adult part of life anymore if you're married, obviously. Like
Yeah.
that's the heart of adult life is the married chapter normally, right?
Yeah.
So it's like, it's really clear. Whereas I'm a bit of a lingering man child. So, you know,
I wouldn't say that.
It's different. I said a bit of a lingering man.
Okay. Sorry.
No, you're all right. That's all right. You're sticking up for me.
Yeah.
You don't have to apologize.
Okay.
So, yeah. But it's also, I actually think it's really nice. Like there was a 30th last year and a very small one. You weren't at this one. And then it was like 11 o'clock or something. And someone had the nerve to say, and I quote, "Would anyone like a cup of tea?" and I said, "No one move." I said, "No one move." I mean, this is going to be in the next book. No one move. This is a threshold. I go, in era gone by,
Cup
this
of
is the
tea.
time where it would have been like, does anyone want an Uber?
Uber.
Does anyone want to, anyone want a taxi? Anyone want to split a taxi? Or is are we going to the station? This would have been the kick-on part.
It's the night's just
you know?
beginning.
The night's just beginning. 11
You could
o'clock.
even have pre's up until that
Yeah,
point.
we probably would have left before 11 o'clock,
Yeah.
but for argument's sake.
Yeah.
Whereas this was like, do you want a cup of tea? And I thought,
Is that like symbolic
this is
of the
the
marriage?
age. This is the aging. This is the. I go. This is youth is on this side of the line,
T's
and
on
maturity is on the other, and T is the line.
the line. Yeah.
And I said, let's be careful. Are we going to? And everyone. By the time I was explaining this, they'd put in a request for a cup of tea already. and then they said, "Joe, do you want a cup of tea?" And I said, "No, I'll have an English breakfast if you've got it, thanks." And you know what? It was really nice.
I was about to say that kind of is up your alley a bit.
Well, I really don't have too much like. I don't know if you have this, but I don't have like much of a sense of like loss
for the
for the past.
party
Yeah,
parties
but it was.
era.
How would you define like this? It's not just the party
Not
area.
party.
It's the party is a big part of that chapter, and I don't think I'm too fussed about leaving that chapter behind, so to speak, as a whole. And the partying, because mate, let's be honest, like the partying is like a. I don't speak for all quote unquote young people, but partying is a little bit like a thing you're expected to do and enjoy. It's like I'm not using my youth if I'm not making the most of it by partying. So sometimes you feel not the expectation, but you just feel like what you should be doing. And sometimes it's just not
Felt pretty.
many nights. I believe the term "for the sake of it"
Yeah.
would be apt to describe many of my slash our slash whoever's youthful nights. Because my obviously Oscar is
He's in the thick of it
23
now.
so he's in that period, and I just look at it. He's not the most like outlandish partier obviously, but it's like a Friday night, there's a come on guys, let's do something energy, and yeah, I'm just happy to wave at that.
To be fair, it felt pretty innate to me. I'm not gonna lie.
yeah, I obviously
know.
at times it did as well.
Yeah.
It wasn't like I hated going out, but sometimes I was like, oh, and then you go out, you're like, ah,
Yeah.
So, yeah, I don't know. Does any of what I've relayed about that entire this little experience so far, is that similar, different,
Similar. Yeah.
similar but different?
Definitely when people start to get married. I think our first cab off the rank was a little bit earlier. James,
Oh yeah, that was
Yeah,
a few
that
years
was-
ago now.
mid-20s.
Yeah,
He sort of got married before
yeah.
everyone else.
beat
And that
the
was a
rush.
big thing. And I don't remember the last wedding I went to before that, but that was pretty, I was like, oh my,
You'd have been pretty involved in that.
yeah, I was, yeah, groomsman.
Groomsman for hire.
Groomsman for hire. If anyone needs groomsman,
Luke Smith is the in-demand groomsman of this generation.
it's okay.
What a man.
Don't trust me.
Book
to
him
organize-
early.
Don't
Book
trust
him
me
early.
to organize like things.
Yeah,
'Cause we all
groomsman.
know that, or be on time.
Yeah, you need like a reliable organizing groomsman or best man alongside you.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I'm sort of like the
yeah.
tertiary.
Yeah, you're just like you have to be in the picture, but
Yeah.
you're not coordinating and pulling strings, and that's fine, mate. Everyone's good at different things. Back to Jimmy's.
And then,
Jimmy's
I hadn't been
blessed
to many
matrimony.
weddings, and then I went to, obviously was involved in that in the organization. It was a very big undertaking.
Yeah,
But I think you don't. I don't know. It's just a lot that goes into it. I don't think you appreciate it until you get to the day and actually experience what it's like. Because I loved it.
yeah.
And then I was like,
great.
these things are quite, they're quite special. They're
I've
very
been-
expensive.
I've been loving friends' weddings, especially.
They're great.
Yeah,
Yeah. And you're right. I think it is a demarcation point.
very demarcating.
It's like now, okay, now it's
Whoa,
serious.
it's
Now,
real.
Is it serious
It's
now?
real.
Yeah.
Time to grow up.
Well, then obviously, then evolution is then people start, thinking about having kids, and yeah, it's kind of like the doorway into the next chapter.
It is. Yeah, it's and it's age is a funny thing with all this, because what is the right age for people to get married? Because it's such a spread now.
That's a good question.
Yeah, it's what's the best. I'm certainly not helping at all. Well, neither of us is married yet, of course, but my grandfather was 33, I think, when he got married. My mum's dad,
Must have
which
been.
was probably less common
Back then,
back then. That'd be
Yeah.
much more normal for I'd use the word demographic
These days
delicately.
now, yeah.
But I always say to everyone, like the Lebanese Australian community,
get married early.
well, they'll usually get married early if they are culturally Lebanese Australian. So I wouldn't say I'm the most like because obviously I went to a school that wasn't big ethnic, especially Lebanese influence. But the ones who live more, I'd say around Parramatta and all that, they typically get married much earlier, early 20s, mid 20s. Obviously some late 20s, 30s and all that as well. It's still a bit of a spread, but much more common to get married when they're, say, my brother Oscar's age.
And I think that
Much more.
was
Whereas our group is like that James, who would have been a real
Early.
outlier for
Early.
because he went to school with us, our year group. So it's funny that the different cultures, and then you talk to Nick Abraham, who grew up in Orange. And for anyone listening who doesn't know Orange, it's rural. It's about 3 hours from here. And a lot of them have been separated by their mid-20s and got married like really early. And Nick's explanation is that there's not much else to do out in the sticks, Joe. You get married. That's something to do. So it's very interesting, like the whole age we're getting married, and with education, typically, I feel like people tend to, get married older and have less.
Do you think
less kids? I think.
financially as well?
Yeah, I think you're more dialed into. Well, obviously the finances are a factor.
Yeah,
Yeah,
but-
cost of living and everything.
How would I guess? Yeah, when you're
Well, we'll
getting
talk
married
about
earlier.
Gilly had his own house by the age of 24 or something, and was partner in law firm, and then had his first kid, or he's married or something. So
Yeah. Can you imagine
it's probably just,
at 24? No one.
yeah, like I know a house in Concord then was $9,000 or whatever he paid, but obviously you didn't earn what you'd earn now, but probably wages to property prices,
That's what
the
I'm always
ratio
curious
yeah,
about
I
is-
think in general it was much more in the salary earner's favor. I don't think this is just Sydney. I think this is like a bit of a global thing. I think you hear the same things out of the US, because I know Tim Dillon's always making fun of baby boomers. And
Yeah.
it just sounds the same. Like they just go in, snap up all the good properties as a hobby. They keep doing it. No one who's young can afford the baby boomers have all the really big houses, and then he makes it very funny. But it just sounds like a similar dynamic. And so is that just a society thing, that society evolves a certain way where economics, start to make it that things and assets and property and all those things start to get really expensive, and like our salary and wages can only go so high. So it's there's obviously a lot of factors. What's really made me think even more about this, which is a very very funny link, but the book Brave New World.
Never read it.
Oh, you never read it?
No.
So it's like you've heard of it.
Yeah.
I'm making a mammoth video on it. Like I'm still editing it. It's like currently an hour and a half.
Yeah. Wow.
That's a lot of time of just me talking.
Stay tuned for that one.
But yeah, I've spent a lot of time on it. I was reading it mainly while I was away a couple of months ago. And I think it's one of the most famous, like there's 1984 and there's Brave New World. They're the most famous of those dystopian sort of what would the future look like if bad things were to happen books. But the difference is in 1984, it's like a totalitarian, mind control, like propaganda, like a government's kind of seized control. But the thing in Brave New World is that it's more like we've handed over control and like we've handed over like freedom maybe for like cheap dopamine. So they have like Soma, which is like basically a drug that has no hangovers or real consequences. And it's just like their happy pill. And they just take Soma all the time. Babies are grown in test tubes, so they're not conceived. There's no such thing as a mother anymore. There's no exclusive relationships. So people just have flings. They get like put into jobs, basically like castes and certain jobs from birth. And then they're just they're taught in their sleep, like they sleep and they play like tracks and like, green is good, alpha is good, and this caste and whatever color they are is bad. And so it's just all conditioning. So there's not really any education. It's just like conditioning, and there's no religion. So it's very interesting. And Huxley wrote it in like 1932, I think it came out. But yeah, it's basically like a hedonistic, like hedonistic, for anyone who doesn't know what hedonistic is like pleasure, normally like shallow. And so it's just a society entirely comprised of shallow pleasure seeking.
What is the outcome of that?
Well, do you want to read the book?
Yeah, maybe
There's
I'll read
obviously,
the book.
but I can talk about the tension because it's not at the end. But the tension, there's one character in particular who's his name's Bernard, and he's really at odds with it because it's kind of cult-like. Like they have they celebrate, instead of God or a political leader, they celebrate Henry Ford. So they have Ford Day because that would have been the time when Ford was like emerging, dominating in the Industrial Revolution, and so they celebrate Ford, and they have a thing called Ford Day, and they do this weird dance in a circle and they chant, or like it's really weird stuff. And he's like doing the chant, but he's like not into it. He's like, oh, everyone else is into this, but I'm not. And so it's really like, is everyone else really dialed in and not this guy? And he's looking for something deeper. So he's like having a relationship with this one woman. Like they've started a fling, but he's like wanting something deeper from it. Like he wants to be alone with her, and she's trying to understand what he means by alone. She's like, when we're in bed together, we're alone. He's like, no, like alone without being in bed together, and like going on dates without like having to do something, but just be. And so he's struggling to articulate it to her, and she doesn't even understand what he's talking about. And it's very interesting because he can't really articulate it to himself what he wants, but he just wants to be himself. So it's like that way of living has taken away, it seems to have taken away like something of an ability to be yourself, because it's basically like she thinks they're all happy. She's like, it's great, everyone's happy these days. And he's like, but wouldn't you like to be happy in your own way instead of everyone else's way? Which to me is like, I'd say, how do you make that make sense for us in our experience? It's like someone telling us what we're going to enjoy in life. Like, you'll be happy once you've got, whatever, financial freedom, or, you've ticked the box if you've started your own family, or, things everyone will probably enjoy, but they've got to be right.
Yeah.
So that's what I'd compare it to. Like, shared idea of happiness versus finding the happiness and everything in your own way and time. And yeah, so there's that. So there's that sort of character. So there's a sort of bankruptcy, like an internal bankruptcy of sorts, but it's like they don't really understand it. So it's funny to watch, which is probably what life's like anyway. It's like they don't have a DeMello or, anyone to give insight into it, because all that stuff's been kind of like, screened out. So it's not as like manipulative or overtly manipulative, I'd say, as like the 1984 stuff of like, oh, we're at war with these guys. And it's like, we're always at war with them and they're our ally. Then we're at war with our ally, and suddenly and they keep confusing people and they're bombing like the suburbs. And so, yeah, it's much more like 1984 is so much more like totalitarian. Whereas Brave New World feels more similar to our way of life now. Like with the dopamine, smartphones, social media, like, attention, bandwidth is getting, less reading books, more 3-second videos, like, society's becoming like, like when I was reading it, I was like, oh, you can see parallels. Like, sexuality's become more explicit, right? In like music videos, TV, like compare a movie now to like in the 50s, and like look at the swearing and the sex scenes, and like, okay. So, and we're less conservative maybe in terms of a lot of those things now. So I just thought it was really interesting, and why it made me think of what we're talking about with the whole life stage and age of marrying is like, if people obviously if we delay the age at which we're going to get married, and assuming you have kids around those. Obviously, it's a bit harder to fall pregnant and stuff because the time I think when we're teenagers is when our biology is like the best set up to. I'm not encouraging anyone to have a kid in their teens, right? But biologically, I think apparently that's the time when everything's peaking. And so it's like, oh, if we keep delaying, what's going to be more common is like things like the support for falling pregnant and like the IVF and the sperm freezing and the test, the so-called, and whereas that's the crux of that society is that babies are just in test tubes and man and woman having intercourse now has nothing to do with procreation and also nothing to do with love. It's only about pleasure. And so I thought that was interesting because something my mum says to me a lot when, you know, I still resist going to church is that you can't just live for yourself. You can't just live for yourself. I go, I'm not living for myself. Bugger off, Mum. What do you know? But something did click to me when I was thinking about the Brave New World thing was that it does kind of like sometimes a lot of these responsibilities like being taken off. Like imagine having kids, the responsibility for having kids gets taken away from us in a way. Like what a weird adjustment. But like it does just lead you into being, so you would live like on your own. You wouldn't have like a committed partner. You literally just be living on your own for yourself, for your own pleasure mainly. Not unlike you can live on your own and have a very rewarding life. But like in general, that idea of, even if it's not, you have a nuclear family of your own, like even just the idea of like a real community, like people you actually connect with, not just interact with, you know what I mean? Or transact with, like people you actually, like we have meaningful friendship, right? But we never been roommates or anything like that, you know, but we're part of a community. Like we have our group of one little pot of 6 friends. We have a very good relationship. And then people have their part. So we're in that community. So it's not purely about living on your own, but you can get to a point where the only thing you are feeding yourself with every day are these little tidbits of pleasure. And nothing is really substantial. And I thought that is what that way of living actually starts to funnel you toward. Because the struggle, even though like a lot of those things can be challenging, like imagine with the cost of living kind of situation we have now, say in Sydney, which is kind of mental at times and can be very overwhelming. We've talked about this. Obviously, having a kid younger would pose certain challenges. And so there's a struggle there. So in theory, like the longer you would leave that, the more you could set yourself up financially, then, you know, on paper, like, oh, that's practical. But then the other thing to consider is like a lot of the meaning in life comes despite struggle. A lot of the reward comes by getting through the struggle and overcoming the struggle and not succumbing to the struggle. You know, like, and that's what, from the outside, someone who's not parenting looks like the best example of that. And probably marriage as well. And probably like a long-term committed relationship as well. All struggle, all compromise, all commitment, you know, all like giving up certain probably personal freedoms, and all these things are really important in it. And I think they're really big religious ideas as well, you know, like sacrifice. And so I just thought it was so interesting. I almost feel like and I think even though my mum, you know, exaggerates a lot, I hope, when she's leveling life advice at me, I was reading that book, I was like, I feel like I've almost drifted into this a little bit. Not because I'm not trying to like avoid relationships or anything or adult responsibility, but it was like, oh, okay, I like writing. Like I want to write. Okay. And then, all right, I'll do this and I'll do this for money and this writing. But almost got into like a little routine where I was like, I felt a little bit like cut off. It's like I was just in my little silo doing that. And it's weird because the line between doing that in a way where you feel connected to people still and doing that where it's like, oh, I'm just isolated writing, like it wouldn't look any different if you were watching me day by day. But it's just all about, I don't know how you're orientating towards it. And it was funny, like the combination. It's funny how everything's kind of speaking to you, and then it comes together in a way. It feels like, and then I just read this book, and I was like, yeah. Sometimes that's what, like, not having as much of this, like, solving everything with like pleasure and removing the hard stuff from life, like, or the hard stuff from your experience, rather than like removing it by dealing with it. Versus just like, because they've basically just, when I was reading Brave New World, that's what fascinated me. It's like, all right, we'll cut off this problem and we'll cut off that problem. Because when I'm making this long video, right, I kept thinking about it. I was like, so if the world was like that, and you're not having your own kids, you're not married, or in a long-term relationship, and you don't have parents, you're not raising children. So if you think about all the financial planning is pretty much gone, because you don't have any old parents, aging parents to care for, which is obviously can be a very difficult thing to deal with, right? You don't have any, like, you don't have to worry about aged care and affording it. You don't need to worry about succession planning and like leaving something behind for your family. You have to worry about childcare, schooling, no private school fees or schools to plan for. All that which creates a lot of the necessity, even though working can be very rewarding and a good career is rewarding, a lot of that they're the conditions that create the necessity for how we work, right? They're all being cut off. And so what does life look like when you're just dumped in that? And it's like, and what these guys in the book, they kind of like have all these really gimmicky hobbies. Like it's futuristic. So it's like electromagnetic golf and the women's something wrestling thing. And so it's just all this random crap. And it's almost like compared to like, if I was like to look at life here, it could be like if you're in a cycle of like, again, we're talking about going out and stuff like that. If you're in a cycle of just going out for the sake of it, or, jumping on the bandwagon of the popular sporting team and going to watch them play, even though you don't enjoy the sport, or it would feel like that, like trying to like constantly distract yourself and give yourself a thrill, not because of like, it's like, oh, it's enjoyable anyway, but because you're trying to just fill the time and you don't know what quite to do with yourself. Because it feels like to me, all that other stuff has a really important purpose.
Yeah, of course.
Right? It
Otherwise,
has a
it's
really
like
important
most of your
purpose.
life, really.
Yeah. So that's what made me think about, that tension.
But it's interesting because
You can't solve these things, you know what I mean? Like,
the more, call it maybe not more shallow, but the more it's kind of like you're trying to optimize for what's going to make you happiest. And the way you think about it might not be what's best for you and what everyone around you, because you're trying to like define it from a pleasure. Like you're trying to be like, oh, I would want to do this will make me happy, sort of thing. Not that you would neglect. You're obviously still going to have, relationship with parents and everything like that. But if you go after specifically certain things, it might just be not necessarily the best thing to go after.
The beautiful word I think you summed that up really well. And I think a beautiful word you use there is optimize.
Yeah,
there's so like, optimizing makes a lot of sense, but there's so much like, it's so easy to like be self-defeating. Because in my head, I think, for example, the way the thoughts like show up, if they were like text messages on a phone, my thoughts, right? It would be like, it would be great if I could just write all day, for example. It'd be something like that. It's not like, oh, I'd be happy if I could, but that's like the subtext. Like that's the text that's not written. So that's the thought you have without it showing up. It's like the code behind it. if you will, that generates these ideas. And I think that it has a lot to do with, again, I don't want to just spoil this whole big video I made, but this might be a better version of it. Is that I feel like half the time it's easy to get caught in the trap of like avoiding discomfort as opposed to dealing with it. Because I feel like a lot of the things just have to do with avoiding a certain state. So, for example, to make this less abstract, let's use writing as an example. Like, there's writing itself and being able to do the writing for the experience of it. But then there's trying to use that experience of writing as a way to escape something else, like
Sure.
boredom or a sense of inadequacy, like, oh, have I done enough? Or could be anything, but it could be as innocent as boredom. But sometimes I get like suspicious of boredom even. Because boredom seems like an innocuous thing, but boredom's obviously like another one of these things we feel that is a signal. Like the power's out in parts of this building today, right? And I was chatting to the old bloke when you were walking in, because he's a tenant and I know him. And so I was explaining to him the situation because luckily we've got power, but his apartment doesn't. And he's literally older gentleman, lives alone, and he's literally just sitting there like, okay, well, I guess I'll wait. And he wasn't doing anything. And so like, shouldn't that be boring? But there's boring, which is like you can't sit with yourself. Sometimes there's that type of boredom. There's also a boredom which is like, oh, I'm going stagnant, like where I am in my job or something. I was catching up with someone who was saying that today. So it's not bad to be bored, but sometimes I'm a little bit suspicious of like this inability to like have a period of time that's not filled and have this like just really invasive boredom. I think it says more about sometimes there's a challenge being with yourself a little bit without having something to distract you. I think a lot of this just comes back to the relationship you're having with yourself. But like very subtle things. But that's where the optimizing comes in. Because it's like, how can I optimize so I'm not bored?
I feel like every
You're trying to
time.
escape something instead of going
Yeah.
towards like, oh, it'd be fun to go for a run versus like, oh, I really trying to like get away from the feeling I have of feeling unfit and whatever. I don't know. It's a subtle difference. Sometimes I think, yeah, there's another outcome that starts to just weigh it down a bit. That's what sometimes like the optimizing just gets a bit, it's funniest to observe in people who optimize way more than you do.
Yeah.
And this is something that's very easy to see we've spent a good portion of the last couple of years laughing at some of this, but it's great to see like the productivity or the like the super like, like the kind of wake up at 5 a.m. 7 things before 7 a.m.
Yeah.
Like to me, that just looks like that's a lot of optimizing.
But sometimes
And it
it's
gets-
not just that. It's sometimes counterintuitive. Like,
Yeah.
depends what result you're trying to look for. Like a lot of
Yeah.
the time, if you remove some stuff,
Yeah.
it helps.
Those zones of like intentional morning and they feel like nice things to I think they're great to make a shift. Like when you've been too much, maybe you've been too sluggish or too lazy or procrastinating too much or something like that. And I feel like they're a great short-term transition, but I feel like trying to do that long-term, I think is often a bit much. Well, for my taste.
Normally, like for example, I think you have, in my life at least, you have your priorities and they're pretty clear at that time. Like if you think about it, a lot of your responsibilities and stuff just come into your life in a way, and then you're faced with pretty much know what you need to do. It's more just finding a little bit of, not space, but just think about like, okay, what should I actually be focusing on at the moment? Like what's actually important versus what are some of the things that might make me feel good in the short term?
Yeah.
I don't know. You're constantly balancing that.
Well, if I was to like interpret what you just said, I'd say there's a difference between trying to like script out a formula
Yeah.
and just be like, just clarity. Clarity is not so much like for me. Clarity is like it's like a weather pattern where it's just like, oh, the day is clear, so I can just see. It's like it's just something that comes, and it's not like it doesn't feel programmable, really. And you used another word before after my big dump about the whole Brave New World idea. There was another word you used, which was like trying to understand it and trying to understand that need to, uh, get rid of whatever the bad feeling was. I was thinking a lot about, oh, you're talking about the happiness idea, like making that mammoth of a bloody video essay as I'm doing, because I've thought about it a lot. I think I was thinking about how there's such a big issue comes when we're trying to, I don't know if this word makes sense, but over understand these things like happiness and all that, and how we're going to feel good, which probably maybe comes back to when we as people get too into like things like self-improvement or personal development, all that, because I think it's almost like what you see in the book is like they've tried to bottle it up. Like they've tried to bottle up happiness and go like, this is happiness, or meaning, and like this is meaning. And the irony of like that way of bottling it up is it takes away the deeper forms of happiness and the deeper forms of meaning, and it's just left like a much more shallow version.
Well, the thing you can't say you do like it just depends because everyone's so different. But say you're like very focused on, I need to improve my happiness or whatever it is by doing these routines. Sometimes you miss for example, you got to get up if you have a partner, spend time with your partner and then go to work.
Spend time
And
with
then
the
you have
kids,
responsibilities at work.
Yep.
It's pretty clear what you got to do at work, to do a good job. The whole day is kind of coming
set
at
up.
you, and you're if you attack the day like that, you got parents, you got to spend time with your parents and enjoy time with family, that sort of thing. If you've got all those things that normally like, it's when then I start looking for other things like, I don't know, you've got like if you have those things, you've got a lot of meaning already there that you don't really need to focus on. Obviously you got to plan, if you want to do certain things like have kids, get married, you got to plan how's that going to happen financially, like, and then you're trying to plan the optimal middle ground of like, I still want to do something that I enjoy for the most part, like that I actually enjoy doing, not like, not professional golfer, for example, as in, but something that's you're interested in a way, but but you'll still make enough to support a family, all those sorts of things. I don't even know what my point was, but
No, I think you're right. Like,
those things start surfacing at this part of life.
Exactly.
Dependent on.
Yeah, and for many people, they've definitely surfaced earlier as well.
Yeah.
Probably for all of us too.
Yeah.
Well, one guy, I won't say obviously who he is, but someone you know, and we're talking at one of these either bucks parties or weddings or something, and he was talking about, I don't think it's a huge betrayal of confidence. He's a lawyer now, and he's like, his dilemma was very interested in like criminal law, and potentially, but that's not the sort of law he's in now. So it'd actually be a major career. When you're not a lawyer, you think, oh, there's lawyers and there's lawyers, like it's all the same. But it's a major like trajectory change, and so he'd be going down a rung in theory, and I don't think it pays as well as like he'd be in a more corporate kind of legal job now. And then his dilemma was like, if he wants to send kids to private school one day, because he went to a private school, which is, you know, not cheap, whether it's too risky to go and have a crack at criminal law and set himself back.
That's a tough question though, because
I agree.
Yeah,
I agree.
which is I think a lot of like, for example,
Is that what you were kind of
I've
leaning into? Like,
or what's the optimal? It's not that, you know, there's, because then once you start saying, okay, I'm gonna have kids, you're like, okay, I got to provide for
Yeah.
my portion.
Yeah.
You know, it's a bit different these days, obviously, with both partners contributing, obviously, pretty much equally, or one partner a bit more, or whatever it is.
Yeah. Most are dual income families. That's another thing I was thinking about. Brave New World thing. That would...
Which is good in a way, because like I feel like everyone's a lot more free to have their own careers and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Which is good, but you got to think. It's just a hard decision. Do you go down a certain career path that might earn less money, but you'll enjoy it more and you'll be less stressed? Or do you go down another path, which is maybe a little bit less enjoyable, but you've got a lot more potential to earn more money, sort of thing? And you kind of balance those two things.
You have to balance those two.
But then there's the argument of, if you go down that other path, there is still, if you'll enjoy it more, you'll be better at it, and then you could probably make a better.
Mate. Well, I'd call all that stuff the intangibles.
Yeah.
And the unknowables.
You just don't
you
know.
can't factor that in, because it's not this like objective. These aren't objective predetermined paths where
You'll never
this
know.
will happen if you do this and this will happen if you do this.
Yeah.
I agree. Like, say for example, someone who's a world class man, like what my dad used to always say is like, you can make money doing anything.
Yeah.
Like, you make money in garbage. Like, there's big bin collecting companies, like bingo bins and all that. Like, anything can go anywhere. And yeah, it's so much easier when you like, I'll give you a best example. For me, as like a real estate background, like I've had a big love-hate relationship with like real estate as an agent career, and kind of 1 foot in, 1 foot out, obviously, for most of my post-high school life.
Yeah.
But yeah, I could tell, like, it's just I'd always hit a ceiling where, well, I don't care about this enough to like devote all my energy or the energy required to like be this sort of person. Because I don't want to do that much real estate. And you just know that in yourself. Whereas obviously in real estate, you can earn $60,000 a year. You can earn $6 million a year.
Yeah.
Or more, like for some people. So what we normally look at is like a Taleb thing about dentists and in Fooled by Randomness, I think. I'm trying to remember the exact point. But it's like, the idea is when you think about security and career paths, you think the average so-and-so earns this. Whereas the atypical real estate agent earns $6 million a year. But the average real estate agent, so the average dentist will earn very good money. But, you know, there'll be people who earn more than that again in something like real estate or acting, or you just don't know. And then how much is enough, and how much will we need, and like how much money would you live on in the future? Like, we don't know what things will cost.
And then I guess
that's like in 20 years, because they talk about retirement planning, but I always think, how would you even, because you don't know what things will cost at that time. Because there'll be inflation of some sort. You don't know relative. So it's a little bit like you can't fully know. You obviously know what the smarter things are to be doing, as opposed to the dumber things. And then planning eventually leads you back around, I think, to like...
Yeah.
Put my hands up.
Well, you gotta
I'm on a roller coaster.
But that comes down to, for example, some of the self-helpy stuff can is valuable if it forces you to say, okay, where do I want to be in 1 year? Where do I want to be in
I
three
think that's
years? Where do I want
exactly
to be
why
in
it's
five
valuable.
years? Because you planning and
I
you're
think
like,
it's a worthwhile, like, for most people, if it's about the average person, it's a phase. Like, it's a very, very worthwhile phase. Don't know if it's a great place to get stuck forever. For most
no,
people, some people it's just their thing. So be it.
yeah,
But sometimes there's some things where I think, oh, I wouldn't want to be stuck in that
no, I guess you can
forever.
take
But I
elements.
definitely agree. There's a phase. Like we were talking a little bit when we were talking about what we're going to talk about today, right? One of the topics I suggested was learning, right? And something lit up because you're trying to learn a new skill at the moment.
Yeah,
And I was thinking about that because we were talking about like, I think you were talking about like almost tutorial style learning of like you're watching videos, right?
videos, it,
To learn how
just
to
like,
do something,
yeah, correct.
right?
Yeah,
So you're not like learning history. You're learning how to do something
yeah,
kind of engage your mind and your hands and whatever. And I always think about this because when I look back, like for example, one thing I was trying to do that for lately is I'm trying to learn how to do this production stuff better
yeah,
for filming and podcasting and all that. And so I was watching videos about lighting setup, and these guys, will very transparently break down what equipment they use, where they put what light. So I watched like 3 or 4 videos. I dabble with some of the equipment. But what I notice about myself is that I'm like when it's in instructional learning, I'd call that instructional, like they're giving you what to do. I'm always like a bit like, I never read the instruction manual on something when I buy it. My head's just like, all right, let me make mistakes.
yeah, 100%.
I'm like, piss this thing out of here. I don't want to sit down and read. And so what I end up doing is I always end up, I'd call it playing around, but it's very frustrating because obviously at first nothing's working right. Like the lighting's like, oh, it doesn't look right. But like, it's still, even though they've laid out an ABC, I still take that. I almost don't even take much of their A, B, C, D, E. And I'm more just like, it almost just triggers a reflection in me around how I'm going to start playing, if that
Yeah,
makes sense.
yeah, it does.
Which is probably, I think self-help will very often work that way. Is that like, they'll be telling you this, they'll be telling you that in a self-help thing. But I think ultimately it will spark things. It would just be a great excuse to spark something. Like,
Yeah,
I've got to get my crapola together.
yeah.
Or I've got to just be more responsible for
Then you'll
this shit.
move forward and start
Yeah, and
doing
ultimately
things
you
and
implement you, I
exactly.
think.
Yeah,
Like, for example, that very small example of lighting. Like, mate, at the end of the day, we're sitting here. I've got equipment lighting over there. We're not using it. We've got the lights on. We've got some natural light. And for a situation like this, I think this looks very adequate. And we're playing around and we're testing today,
it'll get better.
really.
Don't worry.
Oh, it will get
It'll
better.
get better.
Yeah. Progress isn't always linear. Like, it's not always continually better. Obviously, there's sometimes some things that are backward steps, but I just keep finding it funny how I really feel like that's the real way anyone learns.
I mean,
It just slides around a little bit in terms of how it looks and how it progresses, but we're not like a download thing. You know what I mean? It's not like a USB. It's not like we plug a USB in and get knowledge from one thing and then straight onto here. Like, mate, even learning history, which seems like that sort of process. Like, I would have to go back, read the book again, watch the show again.
but nothing sticks for me sometimes.
Well, nothing sticks, but a funny example for me is like if I rewatch an old TV show. Because if I've watched the show once and then I go back and watch it like a year, 2 years later, so much of it I will have totally forgotten. Like, oh, I don't remember that. I don't remember that. But if I do a third watching, so I've watched it twice before, then I feel like the jump in what's been retained is so much.
Yeah,
And then obviously there's a diminishing return, I think. But I always laugh at that pattern, realizing, first time it's very in and out. Second time you come back to something, a lot more stays. And then third time and fourth, it's like, a lot of it will be. So it's very interesting how how we learn is so what's the word, like scrappy, iterative,
Yeah,
like
that's it. Yeah,
you
like
know
for example, I can give you the actual example. Is
mm,
I know I've talked about it on the podcast before, but
oh,
like
it would have been
trying
ages
to
ago. Yeah.
learn like a network engineering course, which is like an entry level course, which teaches you the fundamentals
Yeah.
of, how networks come together,
Yeah.
and stuff like that. It's a lot of technical
Yes.
stuff at first because you got to really, there's a lot of complexity that it needs to gel together, but it's only like there's a structured way to learn it, which is you listen to the videos and you try and digest that. But then there's the labs, which they're actually put together simulations of networks, and you
Yeah.
go in and you
Yeah.
configure the devices, and
Mm.
that's another level because you're actually seeing how those concepts relate and how what breaks, what doesn't work, how it comes together, that sort of thing. And then another level is there's this other simulation software that allows you to create your own
Oh,
network. So you can literally simulate. It's called like
that's cool.
packet tracer. So Cisco have done something where they they've simulated all the devices.
Yeah.
So like, well, not all the devices, but
Yeah.
you can
The relevant ones.
have
Yeah.
switches and you can just create all these in a virtual environment and you put it together and you like join the cables and it's almost like it allows you to not go out and buy all the stuff, right? And then you're
Wow.
like actually
That is
going
clever.
in, configuring the devices, and then like
Never
something will
been
break
there.
and you'll be like, why is this not working? Why can't I? So you're troubleshooting as you go, and that's where I feel
Wow.
like you learn so much better because you're like forced to be like,
Grabbing it.
how does it come together? Why is this not working? And now with
And you're describing every learning experience I've ever had,
yeah,
like editing, video editing and all that. Like, ah,
yeah,
why isn't this? Ah,
and then you got another level is the going and um fortunate enough to work for a telco company. So they sometimes you can have access to old equipment that gets thrown out.
oh yeah,
Anyway, next you have the devices and you
yeah,
plug
yeah.
them in
Plug
and you
and play.
connect them all together, and that's sort of yeah. But it's not until like it's got to have it together. Like you got to have the structure from the videos, but then hopefully see how it's actually implemented. Which then comes down to if you're not doing that. For example, you do a degree, but then you go out and work in industry, and you're like then you figure out how the job comes together by just doing the day-to-day
Yeah,
stuff.
they have to. They have to. I think what's the best word? Cross reference. They have to kind of correspond in the end.
Yeah.
They have to. And another word I thought of while you were talking was piecemeal. Like we learn in a piecemeal way, like random pieces in a jigsaw. And the other thing I thought of when you're describing, especially that simulation, was like it sounds like a game.
It is. That's why
You know,
it's so much
puzzle.
fun
It's
because you're like
puzzle.
trying to figure out what makes these things work, and it's like
Yeah,
you're constantly trying to learn different things about how it comes together, and it's quite
yeah. You're firing neurons for me. Like it just makes me think learning has so much more to do with play than like the information part.
yeah.
Because at the end of the day, you just tie all this stuff.
A lot of the time, the videos feel like you got to just force yourself to focus and write notes and stuff like that. Whereas I can be in Packet Tracer for 3-4 hours, just like
Wow.
figuring stuff. Because you're like, it's frustrating because
Yeah.
but then you just keep tinkering and like,
Tinkering's another
yeah,
great word.
tinkering.
I
Yeah.
like tinkering. Another great example, I would say personally, is real estate. Everything from the real estate agent part to even now trying to learn or do more property development part. And why I love it is because last year I was potentially going to get involved in a business that was also like a property investing business. And one of the ideas we have was to make like a little course to start off to like give people information and then, they might want to go deeper. But the funny thing is when you're in the headspace of trying to design a course, I don't know if you've ever been in that headspace before. It doesn't have to be a course, but like trying to just teach someone else about a concept. You try to come up with I try to come up with a linear process of like, this is the first thing you need to know. Like a high school curriculum, a school curriculum. This is the first thing you need to know. This is the second thing you need to know. This is the third thing you need to know. And it's almost like you try to build it like that. But the funny thing with property, which I'd say probably is common with a lot of things, like, for example, say history or any other topic, but it's there's not one path. There's not one conclusion. Because if I say property development or property investing, you can do commercial property. You can do retail, which is different to commercial. You can do industrial, which is different to all three of those. You can do granny flats. You can do duplexes. You can build apartment building. You can do mixed use. You can go all these different. Yeah. You can do mixed use in eastern suburbs. And every area is different. Every city is a little bit different, has different dynamics, has different kinks, has different geographical realities, government. There's so much about it that linear, very straightforward 1, 2, 3, 4 process has always seemed, and not many people really even try to learn it that way. Really, the way I find I learn it is like almost the opposite, which just so happens to be the natural thing to do when it's property, is to go, you look at what's available, like a site you could purchase, for example. And then you look at that, and then you try to understand how do I understand if there's potential here? And then along the way, you realize where the gaps in your learning are. Like, I don't know anything about like sewerage or something.
Yeah.
Or what's an easement. So it's like you figure out your holes by just like going. It's basically like if the first time you played soccer was you just jumped on a pitch.
Yeah.
Like, okay, you're like really slow, but you know where to be naturally, which is unusual. Like, oh, that's great. And you're not that good at attacking, but it's like doing that, like jumping out there, and because it's like it's easier. For me, it's just easier to learn up that way, and you're just picking up random bits of learning.
Yeah.
From conversation, like I have to ask an architect, what could you build here? Because I don't know if you could build what I think you could build. And then the architect explains something, and then you can take something away from that conversation with the architect. Because so you always need to make sure you understand the setbacks, how far it is from the boundaries. And then that's something that you now can, and you will store stuff, I think, based on how much a problem it caused you a lot of the time.
Yeah.
Like, I wasted all that time on this one and I never even thought to check the setback. So like, now next time I will check the setback early on. So the amount of pain something causes you is often one thing that's going to make it stick.
Yeah.
When you're talking about making things stick. Just like in life, like your biggest mistakes are the things you can be paranoid about them, but they're often the things you'll keep in mind.
Yeah.
Like, I don't want to be I don't want to be like a flog again, or I don't want to be duped again by some scheme. So I just find that it's a good example of how you learn it the opposite way. It's totally non-curriculum style, and it's like everyone's just doing their own curriculum as they go in real time. We're rapping?
Yeah. Sorry, Joe.
How good?
I'm continuing.
Did we miss anything? Did we leave anything out?
Well, no, we've got future episodes for that.
Beautiful. Do you have any parting words of wisdom or non-wisdom?
Not wisdom, but just thanks for
be
inviting
good
me
to
back
others.
after our
Oh yeah, it's great.
after our feud.
It's great the feud's done.
It's good to be back in the studio.
All right, so we'll do another one in like 1 or 2 years, maybe.
Depends if we haven't,
if we have another feud.
I've dropped it.
You've let it go?
Have you let it go yet?
I don't even remember what it was.
Okay.
I just know I'm upset.
Okay.
Thanks, Luke. See you, buddy.
Joe.